Cold War began in the late 1940s, which sparked the fear of communism across the world. During the 1960s, student and worker movements spread across the West. Therefore, on October 20th, 1970, the Italian Red Brigades were formed by two University of Trento students, Renato Curcio and Margherita Cagol, along with Alberto Franceschini, and they began in the regions of Reggio Emilia, Milan, and Turin. In the late 1970s, they expanded to Rome, Genoa, and Venice. Their main goal was to strike the state due to multinational corporation connections and to remove them from NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. In 1981, the Italian Red Brigades split into two factions, the Communist Combatant Party, known as the PCC, and the Union of Combatant Communists, known as the UCC. Nearing the collapse of the Soviet Union, police forces began to intensify security measures against the Italian Red Brigades and other terrorist left organizations. Therefore, they began to reduce membership and power, thus becoming weaker until the arrests and the complete dissolution of its members and the Red Brigade in the early 2000s.
One goal of the Red Brigade was to undermine the government to create a civil war. They chose this overarching goal from the writings and beliefs of Marx and Lenin. Marx's historical materialism was a huge factor in motivating and recruiting for their group. Marx's dream was that the underclass would become conscious, rise and rebel against the privileged, creating a society of equality, overthrowing the capitalists. The first step was to break the population's false consciousness. Marx described false consciousness as the view that most of people's ideas are unconsciously programmed into them by their society. They did this by targeting the ideological superstructures that created the society's ideas and values. This theory allows us to reconnect the human being with the state. This means that a human being is connected with the state and the human being has a transformative capacity. Thus, mankind has the ability to reconstruct the state. This is the fundamental understanding of human nature that allowed the Red Brigade to have such faith in their actions. The Red Brigade used this mentality underscored with Lenin approaches to rebellion. The student movements during this time period is where the shift between psychological manipulation and actual action collide. Up to this point, many terrorist groups, although efficient in creating fear, lacked actual collateral damage. However, as seen in Cuba during the 1953 Cuban Revolution, violence became an efficient and effective way to accomplish political gain. The violent actions taken by Che Guevara and Fidel Castro were validated by these members as they tried to replicate the same social changes that they had successfully passed in Cuba. The Red Brigade utilizes new commonly trait of psychological warfare. For in the 1970s, there were 697 group headings which claimed the paternity of 14,500 terrorist attacks, according to Tarantelli. This is a high number of attacks, causing a state of fear in Italy as the attacks were happening on a bi-weekly schedule. The group was fundamentally unsuccessful in psychological anti-capitalism agenda because as the fear increased in the people, the more the state operated as a united front to combat their actions. Instead of starting a civil war, they highlighted the stability of the Italian government.
At first, the terrorist organization kept their activities minimum, such as small acts of arson and vandalism. They typically attacked factories and offices of right-wing supporters such as political parties or trade unions. Soon after these small acts, the Red Brigades began to abduct powerful Italian leaders to show their strength and create fear amongst Italy. In 1972, the organization abducted Udogo Marchiarini, a business executive. Not long after his abduction, they released him with a sign that said, "Hit 1 to educate 100, power to the armed populace." The Red Brigades didn't stop there and continued with several other abductions of executives in the following year. The first victim the Red Brigades held a ransom on was Mario Sosi. They demanded the release of 8 of their imprisoned members for the release of Sosi, which the fellow prosecutor agreed to. In the following years, the Red Brigades kidnapped 26 wealthy men and women in order to demand large amounts of money for their victims' release. For example, one abduction could cost as much as $2 million for a release. In 1976, 49 Red Brigade members were prosecuted in Turin, which created retaliation against the government officials such as shootings. In 1978, the climax of the terrorist attacks peaked due to some of their leaders being arrested. This was a factor for the abduction of Aldo Moro, the former Italian prime minister, on March 16, 1978. On May 9th of that year, the Red Brigade's demands were denied. Moro was shot 11 times, and his body was then found in a car in the middle of a busy square in Rome. The next week, the terrorist group killed 7 other politicians, creating more fear in Italy. The sphere continued as the attacks grew worse and worse. It wasn't until the 1980s that over 400 members of the Red Brigades were jailed, leading to the end of the terrorist organization's attacks.
Everyone knows that for the most part, Italy's political situation today does not reflect the communist past it was involved in during the 1970s and 80s. However, the reasons behind this transition can be ambiguous. We first start noticing the shift away from communism with the split of the PCI into the PDS and PRC in 1991. This event, along with the fall of the Soviet Union, signified the end of Eurocommunism and the rise of democracy in Italy. In Italy's case, it led to the party Forza Italia, a primarily center-right group with ties to the Christian Democrats who retained power for many years under Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. Until his last term in 2011, Berlusconi impacted Italy for years to come. If you ask many Italians today, they will tell you that Berlusconi is to blame for the corrupt state of the Italian media and in many ways the corrupt nature of Italian politics. Some will argue that Berlusconi's lengthy tenure is an indirect response to the communist situation, especially regarding the PCI and Red Brigades. The same way how, in American politics, it is common for a Democratic president to be elected after a Republican one, and vice versa. Italy was ready for a change. Today, Matteo Renzi, a member of the Democratic Party, is Prime Minister of Italy. While the Democratic Party is an offset of the PDS and in turn the PCI, it does not reflect the old communist ideologies. Renzi has attempted to pass numerous referendums and reforms in an attempt to repair and improve the Senate and the general state of Italian politics. He is also most notable for lowering taxes and attempting to boost economic growth through lessening of regulations. Renzi was widely popular, especially at the beginning of his term as Prime Minister. With the highest approval rating of any politician in Italy at the time, Renzi was seen as a much-needed general change from the Berlusconi era. While his approval rating has dropped in the last few years, he is still generally well received by the Italian people. Therefore, we see that the political situation today in Italy is not ideal. Corruption is extremely widespread, and every year countless referendums are proposed and never passed. Even if they are passed, they have little to no impact on the Italian people or on Italian politics. That being said, it is an improvement from the days of the Red Brigades and the fight between the Christian Democrats and the Communists.